Hello, and welcome back to the Masonic Roundtable, a weekly program where Masons from around the world get together to talk about Masonic news and opinions in a friendly and social manner. The standard disclaimer applies. The thoughts and opinions expressed here are solely the opinions of the participants and do not represent any Grand Lodge statements or positions. Make sure you keep your conversations open for the public and on the level. To interact with us, send questions and comments to our Twitter page at Mason Roundtable or on the Facebook event page for episode 151. Scottish Freemasonry before 1717. You know me, John Ruark, past master of the Patriot Lodge number 1957 in Fairfax, Virginia. And I'll hand it off to Robert Johnson. Thanks for joining us, Robert.
Hey, thanks. I almost wasn't going to be here. I do apologize for the substandard audio this week. Forgot my headphones, so this is podcasting over a cell phone in its most legitimate way possible. So thanks, and for not minding. Waukegan Lodge 78 past master, current secretary, and host of Whence Came You. Thanks.
Goodbye, data caps. Nick
Johnson, past master of Corinthian Lodge number 67, and also a member of the Royal Order of Scotland. So I guess that's a Scottish connection somehow.
Scotland. Nice. And maybe you'll enlighten us on some of similarities of what you've seen and what you've researched. Maybe not. It's a secret. Juan, introduce yourself, please.
Hello, everybody. Juan Sepulveda here from the Winding Stairs Freemasonry podcast and a member of Orange Blossom Lodge number 80 in 70 today, Kissimmee, Florida. Good evening.
Yeah, cold front's coming through. Last but not least, Jason Richards.
Good evening, everybody. Jason Richards here, Worshipful Master of Acacia Lodge number 16 in Clifton, Virginia, regular old member of the Colonial Lodge number 1821 in the District of Columbia. And happy to be here.
Right.
And not at a hospital.
That's right. Congratulations in advance. If you're probably listening to this, unless you're one of the 29 people listening to it live, by the time you listen to it, Jason will probably have a newborn little one. So congrats in advance.
I've been assured it's actually mine, which is a good thing, I suppose.
You'll find out in a few days.
Once the paternity test comes back, yes.
Okay, let's go right into, Masonic news. Another reason why we chose the Scottish episode this week is in honor of everyone's favorite Masonic Scotsman, which is Robert Burns. And for those who don't know, it's a tradition every year for Scotsmen and Masonic Scotsmen alike to celebrate the birthday of famed poet Robert Burns. So
by holding a Burns supper.
By eating a lot and drinking scotch.
Yes. And walking around in kilts.
And talking with an awful accent.
And reciting an ode to a haggis.
That's right. Good poems, though. So if you know of a Burns supper, go see one. If you want to know what
probably already done.
His birthday's
go to the one next year.
His birthday is 25th, right? So it's coming up. It's either before or after. Either way, good times to be had. Check them out. Let's see. No progress has been made on this DCGathering.com site. Just as a reminder, if you haven't heard, on www.thedcgathering.com, there's a mysterious date which we think to be the day before the tricentennial. I know I'm pronouncing it wrong. The 300th anniversary of Freemasonry in or around DC, not United Grand Lodge of England. So
technically, as we will talk about today, it's the 300th anniversary of the founding of the Grand Lodge of England, not necessarily of Freemasonry.
There you go.
There were people in the Winding Stairs group that were very upset that they thought we were talking about the 300th anniversary of Freemasonry.
But it goes back to Egypt, right? All the way back. And we're smirking because no, it doesn't.
And we'll
don't let anybody tell you otherwise.
We have the Egypt show, which will be in a little bit.
There you go. Now this one's interesting. Masonic news. found on Reddit from our brothers posting from Texas. Resolution number 1 was passed in the Grand Lodge of Texas. They just had their grand annual session, and a resolution was introduced where licensed and law enforcement officer brethren are now allowed to carry weapons into the lodge with the Worshipful Master's approval.
In case they want to go deer hunting.
So this is great. I mean, it's a neat experiment. This is one of the beauties of a multi-sovereign Grand Lodge system, where a Grand Lodge can try something and see how it benefits or does not benefit, and nail with as
Or doesn't make a difference at all one way or the other.
true. I know Juan has an opinion about this.
Just arm the Tyler.
With an AK.
Yeah. I just saw today somebody posted a meme of the new outfit of the Tyler, and it's a very well dressed man holding an AR-15 or something like that.
We call those gangsters with Tommy guns in the 20s.
Yeah.
So what do you think? Good, bad, indifferent?
I think people are bringing their guns to lodge, whether you like it or not. They don't have to tell you. That's it.
That's a true story. At my lodge, it's a don't ask, don't tell. Same story for all of Illinois, really. They don't have a statute on it at all. Recommendations, I'd go with a P90. It's pretty rad.
Welcome to Gun Talk.
Welcome
you know,
to Gun Talk.
Masonry is pretty clear on offensive and defensive weapons.
That's
It's
right.
part of the.
Out of context.
Isn't that a ritual reference? Not necessarily.
I didn't quote from it, so ha.
Now, how about this? If you're talking about the Tyler, well, what if the lodge and the master use lodge funds to expend for protection of the Tyler in order to buy a gun for the Tyler?
I'm signing up for Tyler.
Well, that's the thing. I think I think the idea of the Tyler having a sword is horrifically outdated. And honestly, if someone wants to, if the Tyler himself wants to go through the background check and get himself an AR-15 for his job, that's fine by me. It's still not in the lodge room.
Yep.
And honestly, I don't really have an opinion one way or the other on guns within the lodge. I think the Tyler is there to protect the lodge as he sees fit.
Yeah, I know that a lot of brothers have. They kind of take offense, and one of the gut reactions that I find all the time is, "Oh, but why do you know if you don't feel safe with your brothers, like where can you feel safe?" And this, for what I know, is similar to what who was it? Not Teddy Roosevelt. Harry Truman. He was going into a lodge, and the Secret Service wanted to go in with him. Said, "Mr. President, we have to be with you." And he tells them, "Well, if I'm not safe with my brothers, where am I going to be safe?" That's fine. And people seem to take that out of context. He wasn't in danger from the inside at the same time that he had the Secret Service outside protecting him.
Right.
And people take it as, my brothers are not going to harm me. I'm not going to harm my brothers. No, I mean, anybody taking a weapon with them to lodge would be for their self-defense and the protection of the people around them. And I don't know. I know this is a dead horse. Like people rarely bring a smart argument against my position on it. And when I hear it all,
Because they're stupid.
Because you'd have to be an idiot to want to debate Juan.
Right.
We get that.
That
You don't
is
have
an
to
interesting.
come
Here it comes.
stupid arguments.
Ready for the debate, though? All right. I have been wondering, though, like insurance-wise, what does the, I guess in this case, the lodge as store owner, right? Is there any liability that occurs with the lodge should something arise, I don't know, like accidental discharge or something like that? does the lodge carry any liability for actions of its members while it's in session?
See, I think on that point, for instance, many concealed carriers actually have individual insurance that covers them or anything that happens.
Okay.
Lodge goes, though, liability insurance, that might be something a lodge should look at if they know they have people that frequently conceal carry or open carry, depending on your lodge's policy. That, I think, it would have to be addressed individually, and I'm sure a lodge could have a policy that had a provision in it for that written in specifically if that's an issue.
Yeah.
And we know accidental discharge is not an issue. Maybe negligent.
Sure. Well, and however it goes, however the weapon goes off, it's always, that's always what I've been curious about, because I knew about individual carry insurance. I've known about that for a while. It's always because, we have that incident that happened in New York where, they were playing with guns and some kind of fakey, non-Masonic side degree, and somebody ends up dead. I've always just been curious how the Masonic body itself, does it face any kind of, and that's the thing, I haven't researched it, so I'm just throwing this out there without any research at all. But I've always wondered what the liability for the lodge itself is, especially inside of a lodge building, if any kind of thing happens. So.
Well, and the other piece of this is the hype surrounding terrorist threat, in the United States. And yes, we know of, there was a terrorist plot to attack either a Grand Lodge building or a Masonic Lodge building. We talked about it on the show. But remember that those terrorist acts are few and far between, and they're meant to evoke a reaction. And they're meant to evoke an overreaction. So my concern is that we're actually playing into the hype of Islamophobia by saying, oh, we have to take a stand. We have to, protect ourselves because those Islamists are going to come, try to kill us all, because there was a plot that we actually knew about because it was released to the press that, something was going to happen.
Yeah. And there's a thing too, that a reaction that I've seen a lot is that you think that like now all of a sudden, like all the brothers are gonna, and even inexperienced brothers are gonna bring their pistols to lodge. But if you think about it, you go to church and you sit next to people who are carrying a gun. You just don't know it. I mean, by virtue of having a concealed carry permit, they're concealing it. They're not revealing. It's a private thing. And for a concealed carrier, putting a pistol on your hip or your, or wherever you choose to put it, it's almost as picking up your cell phone on your way out of the house. It's part of what you wear. It's not like a paranoid, like, oh, let me go, here we go. It's like, no, this is part of what I carry with me in the unlikely event that something happens. One of the common things you hear is like, I rather have it and not need it than to need it and not have it.
Right. And again, I said, I really don't have an opinion either way. It's if my brethren wanted to carry a gun into lodge, that doesn't bother me as worshipful master, as long as there's nothing in the digest about it. And frankly, I just don't know if there is.
Yeah.
Okay. Last on the agenda for tonight is the Grand Lodge of Arkansas is back in the news with a lawsuit that's been dismissed. Now, this is interesting.
What's up, Prime Mortgages?
That looks like they had a bad deal and lost about $500,000 in failed real estate investments, dating all the way back to the peak of the bubble of the housing market. Now, this is something interesting, and I'm going to ask Nick here. It says that the judge has now thrown out all all the charges on 6 defendants and dismiss the case with prejudice. Remind me what that means in legal terms.
That just means that there's no chance for them to bring this again. Obviously, there's some kind of appellate that you could do, but at this point, it's done. So that's what it means. That's a bad answer, isn't it? But with prejudice is kind of like the burden now is shifted to. Essentially, what it means is that it's just not going to come. It's made the final determination on that case. So, I guess in our parlance, that means that the plaintiff isn't going to be able to file that lawsuit on those grounds again. I don't know if that also cuts them off on any kind of appeal. I'm not really sure. So
now, what's also interesting too, as we alluded to it a couple episodes ago, the grand annual session of the Grand Lodge of Arkansas is coming up in early February. So, in addition to all of the other chaos that's going on in Arkansas right now, Chris Hodup brings up, well, should we being Arkansas constituents, have to worry about this legal burden, this $500,000 of poorly invested funds that they're not getting back from the defendants anymore. So what recourse is there from the members of the Grand Lodge or, under the jurisdiction of Grand Lodge of Arkansas?
Well, the members of the Grand Lodge, the members under the jurisdiction of the Grand Lodge of Arkansas don't really have any recourse for anything these days.
Well, you got me there. Normally, what would happen?
Boot them out. There you go. That's one easy thing to do.
Them out, right?
Well, and that's a really good question on, if the Grand Lodge decides to take legal action for something, who do they get to shoulder the burden of those legal fees? And that's a big question we need to ask ourselves, because if the burden of those legal fees is going to fall on the Grand Lodge coffers, or by extension the brethren of that grand jurisdiction, does that mean the Grand Lodge itself is obligated to bring that legal action or proposed legal action up, before like the grand session to maintain accountability? It's a good question. It's not the first time the Grand Lodge has sued someone, probably, and most certainly won't be the last. So it's something we should at least take a look at.
Okay. Good conversation. A lot of unknowns, but stay tuned for February for the Grand Lodge of Arkansas. I know we'll have a lot to cover at that point. Let's move in now to our trivia question. And this is our segment of the show that we call the Masonic Monday question.
On Tuesday.
Take it away with Nick.
Man, stretch. I like this. Stretch it out. Sunday. Well, I'd like to congratulate everybody who got the correct answer, which was St. Bart's, and the lodge that the question was referring to was La Sudermain, number 35. That was a lodge under the Grand Lodge of Sweden. So congratulations to Chris Stinsman, Milton. Let's see. We had Ed Potter, Joey Boyer, Peter Radcliffe, Jason McKean, Britain Heller, Patrick Fraunfelter, Christopher Croto, and then John Morley, who happens to be a member of a lodge in the Order of Freemasons in Stockholm, Sweden. And so he was very nice to talk to. So yeah, excellent. Good job, everybody. So let's get to the question. Oh, Justin Miller. Oh, I'm so sorry. He's there too. All right. So this question is more of a kind of a spacey question. There has been some thought into the relationship of the Royal Arch degree to what is termed the Royal Arch of Heaven. or our understanding of the celestial hemisphere. The constellations and stars contained in them are used to represent the royal arch and its symbolic meaning within the Masonic system. One very interesting theory is that the companions stationed at the four veils of a chapter are represented in the celestial realm by four stars. Name the four stars and explain their significance to celestial timekeeping. When you have the answer, send it to masonicmonday@gmail.com. Don't forget to include your lodge name, lodge number, and hashtag Iron Fist needs to happen right now. Back to you, John. Comic books.
Thank you, Nick. Try to get off of that as quickly as possible. Go over to this week's topic, which is Scottish Freemasonry before 1717. Now, we have talked about this year, 2017, being the 300th anniversary of the founding of the Grand Lodge of England. It was not yet united. That happened later in 1813. But that was just one Grand Lodge system. That was founded in 1717. Grand Lodge of Ireland came after that, and then finally the Grand Lodge of Scotland was formed much later in 1752, see? 1753. So that does not mean that Freemasonry was not happening during the years leading up to that. In fact, one could argue that there are records of Masonic activities going on that we'll talk about this week way before the concept of speculative Freemasonry. So, Jason, you've done the yeoman's work of this research, so I will hand it off to you and interject where appropriate.
All right. So first and foremost, one of the books that really helped me out for this week's episode is a book by David Stevenson called The Origins of Freemasonry. And it's an absolutely fantastic book published by Cambridge University Press. And it's the thesis of the book, which was published in 1988, is that there is conclusive evidence that at least as far as the British Isles were concerned, the earliest Masonic records point to an origin of Masonry as we know it today in Scotland. Upwards of 100 to 150 years prior to the founding of the preeminent Grand Lodge in England. So going through some of the evidence that David Stevenson talks about, he mentions a couple specific things like the presence of the earliest official minute books and records of lodges, the early recorded use of the word lodge, at least in the Masonic sense, the earliest attempts at organizing lodges across a widespread area, even at the national level, even though the official Grand Lodge of Scotland didn't come until 35, 40 years after the founding of the Grand Lodge of England. We will talk about William Shaw and how he tried to reorganize and standardize Masons' lodges across Scotland here in a little bit. There was also the early evidence of Masons connecting lodge masonry with ethical ideas and stringing those together through the use of symbols with Sir Robert Moray. We're going to talk about him a little bit as well. One of the more interesting things that I stumbled upon was Scotland is where the earliest known usage and reference to the Mason's word arose. And so derived from some of the Scottish Masons' catechisms around the turn of the 1600s, late 1500s to early 1600s. And those catechisms were also some of the earliest catechisms we found. The earliest reference to the Mason's word is actually in a Scottish poem called Mirthful Mourning on the Death of Master Gall, written sometime around 1630 by Henry Adamson. And in that poem, he says, "For we, the brethren of the Rosy Cross," interesting, we have the Mason word and second sight, things for to come. We can foretell aright. So that was the first known usage of the term Mason's word. There are other usages, and John screwed around with my notes. There we go. Found my place. Moving on to 7 years later, Mason's word became, for all intents and purposes, pretty well known among the political theater and religious circles of Scotland. So at least the concept of a Mason's word was largely known at this point, because back in 1637, we have another reference to the Mason's word where Charles I was king, and members of the resistance to his reign were spreading rumors that he had the Mason's word among the nobility. So this is one of the first instances where we see Freemasonry and the secrecy of Freemasonry being used in a derogatory context, saying, well, he's got an in with those folks and those secrets that they tell each other. So this is another piece of evidence that David Stevenson points to in his book on the preeminence of Scotland and the founding of Masonry as we know it today, of course, speculative Masonry, because this is one of the first places where inherent distrust of Masonic secrecy arises. Remember, it's either 1799 or 1899, there's Proofs of a Conspiracy, which is the first anti-Masonic tome that's written, and that's looking at 1637, that's upwards of close to 150 to 250 years prior to when that tome was written, that we have opposition leaders saying, well, the king is in with the nobility, and they're using this crazy Mason's word to talk to each other. And of course, in 1649, the Church of Scotland gets on that bandwagon as well, and begins to fear that the Mason's word is again something that folks use for sinister motives, and it's the reason for the discord and the strife in Scotland, and God is actually punishing the Scots because they are involved in secrecy surrounding this Mason's word. So that's another point of evidence that David Stevenson gives to the idea that speculative Masonry, as we know it, originated in the Scottish Isles. Trying to look, that's kind of a broad brush overview. So, John, do you want to start talking about Brother William Shaw and
Absolutely.
what he did?
So at this time, let's rewind a little bit to the late 1500s. We have evidence through these manuscripts and through other writings that operative stonemasons were working and then having guilds and apprentices and even lodges. So this was going on. In fact, actually, a lot of the great cathedrals, including Roslyn's Chapel, right, were built by Scottish operative stonemasons. If you look at the character of William Shaw, one thing he did, I was starting to think about it in 1590, but actually documented these in 1598, came up with a set of what we now know as the Shaw Statutes. And what these are rules to guide operative stonemason lodges, right? So think of them very much similar to the constitutions of operation of lodges, such that you would see a lot of similarities with Anderson's constitutions and the Constitution of the United States, right? How should lodges work and agree?
Now, it's important to note, John, some of the elements in William Shaw's backstory, namely, how did he start thinking about Masonry? Well, he was an architect, and
Right.
He was actually King James's architect in Scotland. So that's an important point to note, that he was already in these guilds and doing Masonry operatively.
Mhm.
And so, from that point in his experience, he's witnessing the birth of free and accepted Masons, where these guilds are bringing in other non-tradesmen, and he's trying to figure out how to standardize it so that, you know, the original intent of the guilds isn't lost when you bring all of these, you know, Gentiles in, as it were.
So he came up with a couple statutes, and I'm going to skim through some of them just so you understand the flavor of how tradesmen should work and operate. Some things such as, basic one, be true to each other, be obedient to their wardens, deacons, and masters in all things concerning the craft, deal uprightly with each other. If you shouldn't undertake any work that you're not able to perform, and if so, you have a penalty of money. So I think that's kind of interesting. You're not going to take away another master's work. You're not going to supplant him. Let's say you're not.
They didn't have T-shirts at that point.
That's true. Oh, it's a little close to home. Wardens should be elected annually, and no master shall take more than 3 apprentices in his lifetime. Very much the guild system was in place here, obviously, but now they're laying out the rules. Entered apprentice must serve for at least 7 years, and he can't be made a fellow of the craft until 7 years. And yes, there were only 2 degrees in operative stonemasonry at this time. The Master Mason's degree didn't come along until much later in the 1750s. So that comes into effect when we talk about the Grand Lodge system later on. You can't sell your apprentice to another master. You have to let people know when you're going to take on an apprentice so it can be documented, right, that this person works for you. Let's see. This is interesting. You can't hold a lodge unless there be 6 masters present and 2 entered apprentices, and the warden of the lodge being one of the 6. So that's kind of interesting that we have a lot of those restrictions today. And this stuff was written in 1598. It's amazing. Let's see. You're not allowed to basically steal other master masons' work, both take over their work that they've left or take credit for their work that they've done. This is interesting. No master or fellow of the craft shall accept any Cowan to work in his society or company. And a lot of these came with financial penalties, which I think is interesting. That's probably more impactful than some of these symbolic penalties that we may have today. You know, if you break this rule, you got to pay up. Talks about how to deal with quarrels, and let's see, you're not allowed to harbor an entered apprentice that's left its master. So in other words, you can't take another apprentice in. This was an interesting thing from a quality perspective, and this shows how the guild system works. That they have to take, they shall be sworn by their great oath that they will neither hide nor conceal any faults or wrong done in the construction of their work, right? So they are, swearing themselves to the quality, which is good in preserving the reputation of the craft as a whole. And let's see, finally, if all those penalties, those financial penalties, if they get taken up, then those penalties, that money has to be given for charitable purposes, which is kind of cool, right? It's not a selfish organization. We're going to feed it back out. So it's not to, raise dues or anything. So what we're seeing here is a widespread operative stonemason craft that is now starting to establish in the sense of getting rules and orders, which eventually become the constitutions we know today. Now, let's fast forward a bit into the actual foundation of the Grand Lodge of Scotland in 1736. Got my number wrong in the beginning.
Before we go there, John, I missed a couple of key points that I wanted to mention about the degree system.
Yes.
Some of the other things that David Stevenson talked about was we have the earliest, and Robert can chime in here too, we have the earliest instance of the entered apprentice and fellowcraft 2-degree system, and the earliest known uses of the terms entered apprentice and fellowcraft to refer to that 2-degree system. Also of note, the original Mason's word at that time was thought to be match pin, which was superseded in years after that by the term marrow in the bone that comes up quite frequently over the course of the next 40 or 50 years. And we also have, according to David Stevenson, the first instance of the recorded splitting of the fellowcraft degree into the fellowcraft, and then a third degree that we will eventually come to know as the Master Mason degree, because originally the fellowcrafts and the Master Masons were used coterminously, and at some point the decision was made to break those two out in degree as well as in stature. And so we see this occurring in Scotland prior to the founding of the Grand Lodge of England in 1717, which is really interesting.
Now, there, I was just reading a book. I can't remember if it was by Henry Purtle or if it was George Steinmetz, but they talk about the original history of the Master Mason degree. That degree could only be conferred by the Grand Lodge. It wasn't allowed to be conferred by individual lodges until much later. Just as a side note.
Yeah, and remember from our Noah episode, with the first known. Oh, you know what? Never mind. That's not relevant here. Forget it.
That was a great story. Thanks, Jason.
And then I found $5, and it was amazing.
Okay, so you fast forward to 1736, when the Grand Lodge.
First known instance of the legend of the third degree is in the 1730s.
Hey, there you go.
Sorry.
So, not a trick question. About, at least how many lodges were around in England when they decided to form a Grand Lodge in 1717? Or at least how many? How many formed the Grand Lodge of England?
4.
Good answer.
And there was one big one and 3 itty bitty ones.
That's right. So when they were starting to send invitations out to the other lodges throughout Scotland to form a Grand Lodge, there were over 100 lodges in existence that they knew of. And remember, they had very strong operative backgrounds. So of those 100, only 33 sent representatives to the convocation. Of those 33, 12 of them immediately said, thanks, but no thanks. There's really no need for us to hop on this Grand Lodge system, right? Or stop trying to copy England, right? So in effect, when you down select it, only 21 lodges, supported this idea of a Grand Lodge system. So, or 21% at this point. 1 in 5 lodges actually thought it was a good idea. Almost 80%, 79% of Scottish lodges thought it was not a good idea to hop on this Grand Lodge system. Why? They were kind of, self-governing right before then. And which is interesting is that all 21 of those lodges that went along with the Grand Lodge system, they were mostly full of speculative members at this time. So like, sure, why not? Let's order like England did. The 12 that said no thanks, they had a mix of speculative and operative Masons. But the rest of the lodges had strong operative membership, and so they found no benefit in going along with the Grand Lodge system because it gave them no rights or benefits beyond what they already had, right? Because since they're working, it's not a union system. They're not going to manage wages. They're not going to manage contracts. So they're like, thanks, but you give me no value whatsoever. So there's no reason to do that. Well, the way that the Grand Lodge continued on and formed as a way to kind of appeal to those operative lodges, they said, look, okay, how about this? We're not going to be bureaucratic, right? We just want to organize, and that's it. So you can keep your regalia, whatever you have, whatever you've come up with. You can keep your rituals, whatever you have, whatever you've come up with, right? Because I'm sure a lot of these things not being written down, moving around, free association, you're going to have a mixture of rituals too. But if you're so those are grandfathered in. If you're a new lodge that's formed after 1736, you're going to want the same rights and benefits that all these other lodges have had. So the compromise was, okay, Grand Lodge, you said you want to be hands off. We get to keep our rituals too, or we get to create new rituals. So that still is a tradition carried even up to today of that history of the operative nature of Freemasonry in Scotland. And back to the point of the degree system. Well, 1736, you still only had 2 degrees, but shortly thereafter, in 1750s, you had the 3rd degree come out. Well, if you have these operative degrees that have been going on for centuries, like at least 100 years, that only had 2 degrees, and now the Grand Lodge says, oh, by the way, you really need this 3rd degree now because those other 2 weren't good enough. Oh, and by the way, you're now portrayed as murderers in this 3rd degree. They didn't take kindly to that either.
The Noah one was better.
There you go. So
when I imagine those guys being in a guild system said, I got to take another degree. Is this like continuing education? What's this all about? Do I got to pay another dues? Seriously?
Unlike Nick Johnson, where he's like,
I got to re-up my certification.
A new degree.
Good God, another certification.
Keep myself current.
Another petition. What do I sign? So, of course, when you think about the Royal Arch system and how it paints fellow crafts in a good light, that they tended to change their attitude over time. So, okay, as long as us fellow crafts are still good people, we'll go along with this system. Grand Lodge had to send out membership to teach the 3rd degree to all these other lodges. It was really interesting. So that's still kind of carried throughout the rest of Scotland's foundation. So that's a lot of the history of why Scotland still to this day remains different compared to the other Grand Lodge systems, and much more hands-off and much more innovative in the sense of letting the lodges govern themselves for the most part. And anything else you guys want to add before I get to the Scottish Lodge that was formed in the U.S.?
Well, I don't know if you're going to discuss Kilwinnig.
Good. Please cover that.
Okay, so discussing the independence of the Grand Lodge, the lodges within the Grand Lodge system. I'll start by mentioning a lodge, it's the Lodge of Melrose St. John number one bis. This lodge was founded. They have written records dating to 1136, but it's always one of those that it's kind of iffy on records, anything older than that. But they do have a minute book from 1674, and that book actually mentioned different things that this lodge would do, one of which they were given a loft and seat in a parish church, which was actually a big deal at the time, over at an abbey that was in Scotland. And it was pretty humorous that an entry was made in 1690 that said, it is voted that every Mason that takes his place in the kirk or church before his elder brother is a great ass. So that's in the minute books. So, I love Scotland because they just, they don't beat around the bush. But what's really fascinating is, this lodge that I'm discussing was one of those lodges that said, I'm not really sure I want to join this Grand Lodge system. A lot of the push for the Grand Lodge system, I think, was, one, they wanted to have a standardized way in which to communicate to lodges in Ireland, and then the 2 Grand Lodges that were forming in England at the time, because the ancients formed very, very soon after the premier Grand Lodge did, and at that time they weren't dealing in recognition. It was just letters of mutual understanding is what I believe the term was, and those were just essentially saying, sure, if these guys come up. It was a loosey-goosey system. And this loosey-goosey system was so loose that a lodge, the mother lodge, Kilwinnig, number 0, it's actually given the number 0 because existed time immemorial, was actually engaging in practices that you would assume a Grand Lodge was. In fact, issuing charters, and there's a number of charters that were issued by Lodge Kilwinnig, including a number of lodges in the United States. Those lodges, I guess you could technically consider it, irregular in some respects, but at that time, the rules were just how they were. It's whoever was first to the food got to eat. So and that was this Lodge Kilwinnig was actually issuing charters and almost established itself as a fifth Grand Lodge. It finally, after negotiations, and that's another interesting point, negotiations with the Grand Lodge of Scotland came under its auspices, but still maintained a lot of freedom within its own membership. And so you can find if your lodge has Kilwinnig in it, you are pretty much seeing a bright sign of who originally gave you that charter. So it's pretty fascinating, and it does connect us to us in the United States to that country of Scotland. So
Great. So the last thing I wanted to mention was a Scottish lodge that was formed here in the colonies shortly after 1736, which is a lodge that was formed near Fredericksburg, Virginia in 1752. Now, what is interesting about that is that they chose to remain irregular upon their founding. The reason, again, is that not disdain, but the level of self-government that Scottish lodges has. Now, in Fredericksburg, there was a strong Scottish community. So they formed this Fredericksburg Lodge. And the very next year, in 1753, made a Master Mason upon the person of the name of George Washington. So when we've talked about George Washington's irregular past, it was actually in a Scottish lodge. It was in his Scottish lodge. George Washington fought with many Scotsmen and Scottish Masons. So that's how he came to be associated with the Scottish lodge, became a Master Mason in 1753. It was only until 5 years later, in 1758, did Fredericksburg Lodge number 4 actually go out and get its charter and became an official lodge. And again, this is still under the Grand Lodge of Scotland, I believe, and then eventually later in the late 1700s, it then fell into the newly formed Grand Lodge of Virginia. But that's how an unchartered, unrecognized lodge initiated the first president of the United States, finally got healed into the Grand Lodge of Scotland, and then finally got healed again into Grand Lodge of Virginia. I found that interesting in my reading, not so much based on the foundation of Scottish Freemasonry before 1717, but fit into the narrative of the rebel, self-organized lodges and how they continue to operate even well beyond the foundation of their Grand Lodge.
Nothing else. It's a good tribute to the Scottish influence, even of American Freemasonry today.
Booyah.
But,
all right. Anything fancy on social media, Jason? It's been a little light.
Yeah, not a lot tonight. I do need to go back, however, because I mentioned Sir Robert Moray, but I didn't actually talk about him. So Sir Robert Moray was actually a gentleman who wrote a series of letters, and he was one of the first Masons to associate mystical and ethical values with Masonry through the use of symbols. And he was kind of a one-off, odd individual in the sense that we don't have hardly any documentation from Masons around this period actually corresponding about Masonry. So Sir Robert Moray did this for most of his life, rather prolifically. And so he was an oddity in that. However, he spoke a great deal about his Mason's mark. So we knew that Mason's marks were obviously being used heavily throughout this time period. as operative Masonry was starting to transition into an operative speculative hybrid. So his Mason's mark was actually a pentagram, and so he spent a lot of time writing correspondences about the inherent symbolism and the Hermetic philosophy behind the pentagram that he had chosen for his mark, and how it should be interpreted as a member of the guild and a member of the craft. And he was really one of the first people that we at least have records of to do that. So that's another check mark for the the origins of Freemasonry originating in the Scottish Isles. And with that, I'll shut up.
Good. Thank you for that addition, Jason. All right, let's start wrapping it up. Let's go to the mobile mystery machine, Robert Johnson.
I wish I said more, but I was driving and the noise was tremendous in the car. It's starting to snow out here in Chicago. But I think Jason hit those points beautifully. Thank you, Jason. Big thanks to Jason for carrying a lot of the episode. And I did not know, John, about George Washington being made a Mason in a Scottish lodge. I had always thought that he was irregular because of being made a Mason before the proper age. So, in any case, really interesting stuff. The Scottish lodge system always has fascinated me. And I'm just glad that you guys got to enlighten us a little bit this evening. And that's it. So thanks so much.
All right. Thank you, Robert. Nick Johnson.
Sure. All right. So I'm going to throw out something that hopefully I don't get yelled at in terms of from any Scottish brothers. But one thing that I thought was really fascinating, and if you listen to this whole discussion, it was very much this fuzzy line between operatives and speculatives that continued on through Scottish Freemasonry, more so than in any other speculative craft that we have currently existing today. And one of the most interesting things I found out, chatting with a brother who had actually gone to Scotland, he had chatted with, I think, the Grand Secretary there, or somebody, I can't remember who, but he actually mentioned that the master, the order of officers is Right Worshipful Master, Deputy Master, Substitute Master. And the thinking goes is that, at least how it was explained to me, is that the master was actually the laird, the lord of the entire estate, that these Masons would be working under. But because he would obviously not be there, he would appoint a deputy master who would be his personal representative as he was away, and then they would install a substitute master to be the guy in charge. Now, I thought that was very fascinating. I don't know if that actually has any historical credence, but just the simple fact that that story can exist to point out this idea of an operative, speculative craft that just seems to its ending and its beginning between the two is just so fuzzy. It's just fascinating. So again, thank you, Jason, for really highlighting all those points, and I really, really appreciate it.
Good. Thank you, Nick. Juan Sepulveda.
I do have to echo what the brothers say, especially RJ. Your driving was super loud. That's why I wasn't speaking. I'm kidding. I was in listening mode. I really appreciate all the research that you did. The research that I did had hardly anything to contribute. The couple of things that I did find very interesting and kind of give me a different perspective about what Freemasonry, not Freemasonry, but Masonry, in that transition from operative to speculative. One of the things that I liked was the fact that some of the plays of morality that we have, that tradition of morality plays, was also a way of the guild to present itself to the new community upon which it was building new edifices. So it was, in a way, contributing to the community, a morality play, an allegorical presentation of something that the people who would have been somewhat uneducated at the time, here they had a supplement of education, but also it puts their face out there. These are people that now for a long time are going to be a part of the community. And if you think of construction, like these projects were projects that could last decades. If you think about stone building constructions, these are things that you'll have these people living among you for a long time before they move on somewhere else. So this was also a way in which they could connect with the community and now be a part of it. So again, Jason and John, thank you so much for the research, and Nick, thank you so much for your brain. It's freaking amazing. But that's about it for me today. Thank you so much, brothers, for listening to the show. Make sure you share with other brothers that could find it enjoyable and edifying. Send them to theMasonicRoundtable.com. And I also have another podcast called The Winding Stairs, and you can find that at thewindingstairs.com. Thank you, brothers.
Thank you. And good interview on the other Masonic podcast, the Brought to Light podcast with Jack Aquila.
Oh yeah, thank you very much. That was a lot of fun. And for the brothers that haven't listened to that, definitely check out that episode. We talked a little bit about the racial situation that we may be facing in Freemasonry in America. And it's going to be interesting for those brothers from the US to listen to his reaction and the commentaries afterwards. So definitely check that out.
Okay. All right, Jason.
All right. So this was an exciting topic. Anything about Masonic history is just music to my ears, because I find it fascinating, and because we don't know so much of what happened and how this great organization came to be. So it's very interesting to get a glimpse into some of the first known historical records of the transition of the Masonic system from the operative to the speculative nature that we enjoy today. So it was really exciting to research, and huge thanks to David Stevenson for writing that book, elucidating the supposed Scottish origins of the speculative Masonic system. So that was really exciting. I had a lot of fun with this episode, and I enjoyed it immensely. So thanks for humoring me on this topic, guys. I really appreciate it. And thanks to everyone out there for listening to us week after week, and for humoring us with the nerdy topics that we come up with from time to time. So looking forward to the rest of the episodes we're going to have this year, because we've got some good ones that we're lining up. So hopefully you'll enjoy it quite immensely. And back to you, John.
Thanks, Jason. Get some sleep, because your life is
going to
in a couple hours. Hope to see you next week. With whether or not you'll be awake or not, that's a different story, but we'll still send you an invite.
I plan to be here, and the wife knows that I plan to be here.
And you're still going to stay married. Good for you. All right. Hey, I had fun researching this topic, learned a lot, and I hope you did too. Don't have much to add other than, go help us out and support the show by going to theMasonicRoundtable.com/shop. Buy a pin and those awesome, handsome t-shirts that Jason and RJ are wearing tonight. That's right. Let me cut over there real quick. And there you go. They look great. Thank you, Juan, for designing those. And they fit rather well. So I have one for myself. Of course, as Jason says, it seems kind of weird for the band member to wear his own band's t-shirt, but hey,
I'll allow it.
It's good artwork.
Thank you. Well, you like it.
Great. That's all I got. Appreciate it. Have a good night. Thanks for watching, and keep searching for more light. Good night, everyone.